and the other 8, there weren't any positive comments, so I had to kind of conclude that, you know, out of 10 people, 10 other artists input, that's possible of having 10 positive comments, and I got 8 no comments and 2 negative comments, and the negative comments were multiple times, just a couple times each. But at that point I decided it was time to, instead of keep expanding, to contract. So that's a week or so before the reception. So I was still gonna keep expanding for another week, and as much as I could, and I really only got probably a third of the way started. I used up more than a third of the expanding time, but as the more I expanded, the more I knew the more it was steered to how it was going to expand, so the quicker you could expand it. So I was at the point where I was just ready to step up expanding and make it even faster, right when it was displeasing people, and I began to contract it. So then what happened was, the contracting part goes a lot faster than the expanding part, because I knew that where all the pieces had to end up, they all had to end up in individual boxes, and the ball boxes all had to end up where they started from. So I knew that was a known point where they were going. So the contracting went a lot faster than the expanding. The expanding could go on for infinity if you had the time to do that, because you're expanding, there's no end point in it. But the contracting, there is an end point, and that end point, you get to it faster. So to cut a little to that chase, is that the contracting went a lot faster, and everything was already back in their boxes, and to the point where I was ready to take them out within a couple days. So I decided that I'd start hauling them out. I could fit 8 or 9 boxes in my car at a time, so each day I would prep the 8 boxes to go. I'd load up 8 to be able to go, and then I'd prep 8 more to go out the next day. So then the following day I'd haul out those 8, and then I'd prep for the next day for 8 anyway. So with 42 boxes, it was 5 days worth of work with a couple of 9 box trips. So again, to shorten that little story, by the time I got them all reduced, contracted, and out of there before the reception. So my idea was to have it be more of that they're there not physically. Well, I reached the point where I had 1 left, and I had all the remnants, all the tools that I used in the process, which were just found tools. I mean, I had a hand truck, I had a chair, I had the booklet catalog thing that had all the ingredients, all the items that were in the boxes, and I had the bag that I was carrying with me that had scissors and masking tape and clear tape and markers, and a couple marking pens and small post-it notes and large post-it notes, and I had my ink pen that I always carry with me anyway. And I had, in the process of expanding, put out a number of post-it notes with notes and numbers and stuff to help me figure out where stuff, so I'd know where stuff went. And the whole time when I'm expanding, I'm taking into account everyone else's work and trying to work in and around and amongst the space, and trying to claim the whole space as mine without taking it away from there. So it's always going to be everyone's space anyway, because it's a group show, but also to kind of claim all the space and everyone else's work as mine also. So everything that I was doing was based on a step that came before it, and based on what on what works were already there and what people had come in and the whole process, every step depended on what came before it. So now I'm back to these spec drawings. So along the way I noticed, you're in there a long time and you notice everything about everything. I mean, about the ceiling, the floor, the walls, everyone's pieces, the bathroom, the people that come in, the interaction of the space and everything within the space at different times. So it wasn't long before I noticed that the carpet that was in there looked like it initially maybe needed to be vacuumed because there were specks of stuff. Well, it turns out that half the specks were actually specks of paint left over from previous installations of work. But amongst all that stuff, there are also specks of paint and specks of dirt and specks of stuff that people brought in on their feet with them inadvertently when they came in to see the show. And there's certain alignments that happen with the specks of paint that are already there and things that are evidence of previous installations. There's certain alignments and things, and then the random specks that show up, sometimes they align with the stuff and sometimes they seem just totally random. Well, what I started doing was I noticed that, hey, yeah, some things are lining up, and so I lined them up even more. And when there were what I started doing was putting found specks in between specks. I mean, specks that were loose specks of stuff. I started putting them at midpoints between specks that were already there, that like specks of paint that couldn't be removed from the carpet that were already there. And by putting specks in between those specks, it made it look like they were all, like everything on the floor was intentional. And then it became fuzzy between, well, what's for me, the floor, everything began to be one big total piece. So I was using those specks to give order to the whole place and to fit in with the whole place. They became as important as any one of the artist's single pieces. Each speck became that important, which I thought was great, because then I'm in a state of mind where everything is this little incremental small step to get you to the next step, to get you to the next step, and it just is flowing in an unforced way. So anyway, these 8 spec drawings evolved. A couple of them were markers around pieces, and groupings of pieces that I had done before I contracted them and got rid of them. They were like the leftover. And while they were in becoming these groupings, I was making certain outlines around certain groupings more apparent, and some had nothing to do with groupings. They just happened to be out in the space and on the floor space. So anyway, there were these 8 very, very apparent spec drawings, is what I'd call them, made up of found specks and specks that were already there, that I claimed. And they all were in relation to the pieces and the space and the time that it